moving on to a little bit more complex ones. So when we're looking at like the title company itself, how long does it take for a title company to like clear the title and that process kind of leading up to the closing?
The title technically is not cleared until the transaction is closed.
Okay.
So the commitment basically is the results of the search.
Gotcha.
And like I said in section B2, it'll identify what has to be satisfied in the way of liens. And once those are cleared, then and the transaction closes and we disperse everything. Once that's done, then we issue an owner's policy of title insurance, which insures the buyer for clear, clean title.
Gotcha. And about how long would you say that takes on a typical transaction? Obviously, it varies if it's a more
cash transaction. It could be as quick as 3 or 4 days, or 2 weeks, depending upon if there's a payoff or an HOA that has to be financials have to be given.
Gotcha.
Most transactions, FHA, VA, could be 45 days on a typical.
Okay.
Cash transactions, I mean, I've closed them close to 3 days.
Oh, wow.
And then the closing, it's a very quick, easy transaction.
Right. And you touched on it a little bit there. Could you describe a little bit more detail, like what goes on leading up to that closing? Like what are the specific steps that people can expect along the way?
I always tell realtors as I'm educating them, training them, and so forth, when buyers have questions, direct them to the lender. Okay. And if the seller has questions, direct them to the title company. It's a very simple application.
I like that.
And the reason I say that is we do all of our work up front. So we do the search, prepare the commitment, and we share that with the buyer and the buyer's lender if there is a lender involved. And as a result, that process, we do everything up front, we give it to the lender, and there's usually a gap between that and closing. And towards a week or say 2 weeks before closing, the closer of the lender, if there's a lender involved, communicates with us. They create what's known as a CD.
Okay.
And then we balance with the CD with the ALTA settlement statement.
Gotcha.
Once that's balanced and the buyer signs, then it's 3 days to closing.
Okay.
That process, like I say, it can be 2, 3, I'd say more like 45 days.
45 days is the number you really want with it there.
Well, I would say 30 days for conventional, but
Gotcha.
The other two, any government loans, I'd allow 45.
Perfect. And then, so we get to the actual closing table itself, and what does it look like on closing day? What are people bringing with them? What are they doing, interacting with you all?
Kids, dogs. No, I'm kidding. At closing day, what they need to do, typically buyers need to bring their ID, and so do sellers. That satisfies the Patriot Act. Some lenders require 2 forms of ID. Sometimes it can be as simple as a credit card, social security number, or a photo ID from work, or say for instance like a CCW.
Sure.
Those are all that needs to be brought to closing. I always suggest both buyers and sellers bring their checking account information.
Okay.
If a buyer needs to write a check, I know in this world millennials don't relate to checks, but that's part of the banking business.
Right.
We don't take credit cards. We don't do cash. Everything has to be done by the good funds law.
That makes sense.
So
perfect. And they can just go down to the bank and get a cashier's check or something. It's
sure,
pretty easy to do it. Under $10,000, right?
Well, up to $1,000, we will accept a personal check.
Oh, okay.
From $1,000 to $10,000, it can be a form of a wire or a check.
Gotcha.
Anything above $10,000 must be done in the form of a wire.
Has to be the wire. Cool. So let's kind of transition to a couple more like technical questions around what could be impacting certain properties here. And I know I hear the term like an easement or a right-of-way a lot. Could you describe to me what is an easement or a right-of-way?
Easement is a right-of-way, typically. An easement, basically, there's an agreement. A lot of times it's done with the developer as they're developing land.
Sure.
Easements can be anywhere. It can be electrical, it can be utility, underground sewer, water. It could be a number of things.
Gotcha.
So with that being said, an easement gives that person who paid for the easement a right-of-way to repair, replace lines, typically on a utility.
Right.
Sometimes easements can be overhead power lines. Sometimes they require fall. So if the tower is 50 or 60 feet in the air, they want to allow for if the towers fall down.
Makes sense.
So in the event of a hazard or a storm and so forth. But easements, basically, those are usually shown on all surveys that we order.
Gotcha.
And basically it's a mortgage location survey is what I refer to them as. And the lender just wants to make sure that the dwelling is within the boundary lines and any easements are exposed.
Gotcha. And like, let's say, I usually stay with like power lines. I think that was the big one that I see in most properties there. But let's say I have like a driveway of a neighbor going through my property. Is there any way for me to potentially like remove that or buy the rights away from them, or is it kind of just stuck there and I don't have to deal with it?
It depends on how the easement's written.
Okay.
I mean, typically when there's a right-of-way, it's done on what I would refer to as like a flag lot, or a lot where a right-of-way has to be given to get back to that particular parcel. If they don't have a right-of-way or an easement to get to the parcel, then you cannot insure it with title insurance.
Sure.
So to eliminate one, I mean, you have to get typically an agreement with all contiguous properties.
Okay.
So, I mean, a lot of times I'm not an attorney.
Sure. No, of
So,
course.
a lot of times the attorney will do the technical work on that.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I guess kind of talking about attorneys there, it's a little bit different, but looking at trusts, I know I hear that term a lot. My grandfather recently passed away. They're moving all his assets to a trust and stuff. And first of all, what is a trust, and can a trust own property?
The trust basically owns the property.
Okay.
And what you have are the trustees who are assigned and have the ability in our world to buy and sell real estate. So typically when there's a trust created, and the attorneys do this, so I don't want to get too far into that.
Sure.
But when the attorneys create the trust and so forth, all that information is put into the trust. It's very important that the person who has that ability signs the listing agreement and signs the documents at closing.
Okay. So just the main person, the power of attorney type of deal.
No, it's not a power of
Not power of
attorney.
attorney, okay.
So you can't use power of attorney on a
Gotcha.
trust.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. If the person's gone at that point. Makes sense there. All right, perfect. And then I know this is a little bit more exclusive to Ohio, but I've heard of Dower rights. Can you explain to me what that is and how it works?
I'm told there's only 3 states left that have Dower rights.
Okay.
An example would be a married couple. Okay. Say they're selling the property, and when the property was purchased, only one of the individuals bought it.
Right.
And then say they owned it for 6 months or a year, and they got married. Okay. As soon as that person marries that individual who owns that, they have what's known as a dower's interest.
Okay.
Which means people like to say 50%. I don't go there. I think it's a negotiable thing, but that's between the attorneys and
Sure.
and the people. But anyways, they have an interest. So it's always my suggestion that if you are listing a property, you get both signatures.
Right.
Because that person has to give consent that the property is transferred.
Interesting.
So they release their dower rights to the property.
I've heard a couple, and maybe you can clarify. So I heard a couple of stories where someone will separate from their spouse, be gone for like 10 to 15 years, not get remarried, but be with a new significant other, and then suddenly the spouse is having claims to your house that you bought in, 10 years down the road. Does that happen sometimes, or is it?
I had a situation. They were married for 39 years.
Okay.
I'm sorry, divorced for 39 years.
Oh wow.
And they had a lot of rental properties. Came down to the last property, and then as a result, I stepped aside because the attorneys got involved and they took care of everything. But there was a dispute about funds and so forth, and but the attorneys worked extremely well together.
Okay.
And it took a lot off my plate, so I wasn't responsible.
Well, that's good there. And I think this is a great final kind of follow-up question for the technical stuff. And this isn't necessarily exclusive to Dower rights, but let's say during the title process or you run into an issue like that, if there's a problem, like what happens? How do we resolve it? Are lawyers the only way, or are there other mediation routes, things like this?
The only person to negotiate
Okay.
are the realtors and attorneys and the seller and buyers.
Sure.
I mean, so far as a title company, we go by their guidance. There's no way I'm going to argue with an attorney.
Sure, definitely.
He'll press me for facts. I'll supply him whatever they need and so forth. But usually it's between the attorneys and their clients.
So it goes more to the legal side there.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's always situations where people disagree on things and so forth, and there's divorces. But I leave that up to the attorneys.
Yeah, leave it up to the professionals. We
Yes,
just do the
absolutely.
transaction. Perfect. All right.
Most attorneys, if they are real estate attorneys, they know their business very well.
Thanks for making it through the video. Zack Linder here from Zack Linder and the Zack Pack, powered by Coldwell Banker. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It does support our channel. We really appreciate it. And check out one of these other videos while you're here. Have a great day.